May 31st, 1944. The wind howled across the deck of the USS Baxter as the convoy prepared to leave the safety of Newfoundland's fog-covered harbour. 20 merchant ships sat in tight formation, their hulls creaking under the weight of cargo bound for England. Fuel, ammunition, tanks, and crates of medical supplies that the war-starved front desperately needed. For radio operator First Class Jacob Harlow, the night carried an uneasiness he could not shake. He stood beside the radar shack, leather headset hanging around his neck, listening to the steady hum of the sea. The ocean was calm, almost deceptively gentle, but Jacob felt an invisible tension crawling beneath the waves. He had spent 2 years aboard escort ships, watching convoys vanish into fog, only to return with fewer vessels than they had left with. Sometimes far fewer. And now, as the engines thundered beneath the steel deck, he sensed danger in every shadow. Jacob believed, deeply, stubbornly, that a U-boat wolfpack was already hunting them. Around him, sailors tightened ropes, checked depth charge racks, and loaded ammunition crates into the anti-aircraft mounts. These rituals had become second nature, performed with the quiet professionalism of men who knew the sea could betray them at any moment. But tonight, their movements felt slower, heavier, as though the entire crew sensed what Jacob felt, but dared not say aloud. Lieutenant Marcus Ellery approached, shaking off mist from his coat. "Harlow," he said, "you look like you've seen a ghost." Jacob forced a thin smile. "Not a ghost, sir. Just the Atlantic." Ellery gave him a knowing look. "Same thing some nights." The ship's horn blasted a deep, mournful tone that echoed across the harbour. Merchant captains answered with their own calls, and soon the entire convoy's voices blended into a low chorus that rolled through the fog like an omen. The escorts, including the Baxter, tightened their protective ring around the merchant ships. Soon, the formation would be fully underway, threading into the vast, unforgiving Atlantic. Jacob returned to the radio room, where the dim red lights cast everything in the colour of dying embers. He slipped his headset on and listened to the constant chatter of convoy positioning codes, Morse signals, and weather reports. His fingers hovered over the key, but his attention was drawn again and again to the gaps, moments of silence where the sea seemed to breathe. Those were the moments when U-boats crept in. The convoy moved into open water, leaving behind the last comfort of land. The waves began to rise, gently at first, then with more force as the cold breath of the Atlantic swept over the decks. Spray lashed the crew, stinging eyes and soaking uniforms, but no one slowed. Every man aboard had trained for conditions far worse than this. At dusk, Jacob climbed to the bridge to deliver updated communications. The sky burned with streaks of pink and gold, but the beauty only made the moment feel eerier. "Weather says fog ahead," he announced. The captain nodded grimly. "Of course there is. The Atlantic wouldn't let us leave without a gift." Jacob tucked the report away and stepped back as the officers continued discussing escort spacing. The convoy ploughed forward, forming a long steel column that stretched across the horizon. Destroyers sliced the waves at the edges, zigzagging in wide defensive arcs. The scent of engine oil and salt filled the air. The sound of boots clanging on metal echoed through the ship's corridors. Night fell fast. The ships dimmed their lights and entered full blackout mode. Only the faintest traces of moonlight glimmered off the waves. Jacob took his station again, hands resting lightly on the Morse key. Hours passed in near silence until suddenly a faint transmission crackled through his headset, a pattern he had memorized too well. A merchant ship ahead had picked up an unidentified sonar contact. Jacob's breath caught. He tapped the message to the captain, who reacted instantly. Orders flew across the decks. All hands to stations. Prepare depth charges. Maintain zigzag pattern. The crew snapped to action, adrenaline sharpening their senses. Down in the sonar room, technicians leaned over glowing screens, tracking the slightest echoes. Jacob rushed there, unable to stay still. The sonar officer pointed to a flicker on the display. Weak, inconsistent, but unmistakable. Possible sub at 200 meters. Hard to tell in this soup. A tremor ran through Jacob. Not fear, but confirmation. The same feeling he'd had earlier now roared inside him like a storm. "They're here," he whispered. "I knew it." The sonar officer shot him a tense glance, but didn't argue. Everyone aboard understood the danger. The ship's engines roared louder as it accelerated. Depth charge crews sprinted across the stern, loading the cylindrical explosives into rails and throwers. Their faces were pale in the dim lights, but their movements were confident and precise. They had practiced this moment countless times. Now it was real. The convoy began to tighten formation. Merchant ships pulling closer together, as if proximity alone could shield them from the invisible predators stalking beneath the waves. Jacob watched from the deck as distant silhouettes moved like ghosts through the darkness. The sea seemed to stretch endlessly, hiding threats in every swell. A sudden burst of static shattered Jacob's thoughts. A merchant ship was signaling urgently. Its escort had detected a second contact. 2 U-boats? Or more? Wolfpacks rarely hunted alone. This was exactly what Jacob had feared since the beginning. The captain barked new orders. The Baxter changed course sharply, engines rumbling with strain. The ship heeled to the side, sending sprays of icy water across the deck. The sailors held fast to railings as the vessel charged toward the threat. Jacob's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He had witnessed U-boat attacks before, torpedoes slicing silently through the water, explosions lighting the night sky, ships breaking apart in minutes. He had seen men thrown into freezing waters, their voices lost in the roar of the ocean. The memory played like a film behind his eyes, pushing him to work faster, think clearer. Depth charges clattered into place. Each one contained enough explosive force to tear open a submarine like a tin can. The crew braced themselves, gripping the rails, teeth clenched. The ship thundered toward the contact point. Jacob felt his breath lock in his chest. Then, the first depth charge dropped. A second followed, then a third. The explosions echoed through the hull, violent and muffled underwater, sending shivers through the metal frame of the ship. The ocean surged and rolled with the shockwaves. Everyone on board waited for the telltale signs. An oil slick, debris, anything. But the water remained dark and empty. Silence settled over the ship again, heavier than before. Jacob met the captain's eyes and saw the same question mirrored there. Did we hit it, or did it slip away? The uncertainty was worse than fear. It was a reminder that the Atlantic held endless places for death to hide. Minutes passed. The convoy continued moving, but tension coiled around every heart on board. Jacob returned to the radio, scanning every frequency for hints of danger, for the subtle signals of enemy communication he sometimes caught in the static. Nothing. Only the ocean breathing. But Jacob had learned long ago that silence on the Atlantic was never safety. It was the warning before the storm. And he believed, more than ever, that the convoy was being stalked by not just one U-boat, but many. June 1st, 1944. The storm had eased, leaving a grey, restless sea that stretched endlessly to the horizon. The convoy moved cautiously, each ship a dark silhouette against the dull dawn light. Jacob Harlow, seated at the radio, adjusted his headphones and scanned the frequencies for unusual signals. Every static burst, every odd crackle made his pulse quicken. Merchant ships creaked under the waves, their hulls rocking violently. Sailors on deck clung to rails as icy spray lashed faces and hands. The bitter Atlantic wind bit through their coats and gloves, but training kept them steady. Every man understood that the ocean was a predator. Any mistake could spell death in seconds. Jacob's fingers hovered over the Morse key, trembling slightly. He had been trained to detect patterns, and he knew the difference between natural interference and coded signals from U-boats. The silence was heavier than any noise. The convoy moved through it, unaware, yet Jacob could feel the enemy watching, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment. Suddenly, a faint tapping flickered through his headphones. Jacob leaned closer, straining to catch it. He scribbled furiously in his notebook, his handwriting almost illegible under the tension. The pattern matched the U-boat signals he had learned to recognize. He stood abruptly and dashed to the bridge, breath frozen, heart hammering. "All hands to stations. Depth charges ready. Maintain convoy integrity." The Baxter's engines roared as it altered course, cutting across the waves with precision. Sailors moved swiftly, executing their roles with disciplined urgency. The convoy adjusted in tandem, zigzagging to confuse any enemy torpedo trajectory, but tension pulsed like electricity through every man. Down in the sonar room, Lieutenant Ellery watched the screen with a frown. A flicker appeared, confirming Jacob's warning. 200 meters, he murmured. Bearing 085. Probably a Type 7. He relayed the message to the bridge. The captain nodded grimly. "Deploy depth charges. Full alert. We cannot afford losses this early in the crossing." The first depth charge hit the water with a deafening splash. The shockwave reverberated through the hull. Sailors gripped railings and braced for the next explosion. Seconds later, a second and third followed in rapid succession. The ocean shuddered violently, and the surface erupted in white foam. Everyone watched and waited, hoping for evidence of success. No debris appeared, no oil slick, nothing. The submarine could have escaped, or worse, remained submerged and unscathed, watching, planning. Jacob swallowed hard, fighting panic, knowing that the wolfpack might not be alone. He returned to the radio room, fingers poised, ears straining for the faintest coded signal. Hours passed. The convoy pressed on, waves rocking the ships mercilessly. The storm clouds had cleared, but the sea remained treacherous. Each man aboard the Baxter felt the weight of responsibility, the heavy uncertainty of survival. Jacob's mind raced with calculations. Distance, speed, potential attack angles, and the countless lives depending on every decision. At dusk, another faint Morse signal echoed through the headphones, this one more deliberate, more urgent. Jacob recognized it immediately. A U-boat coordinating with others, part of a larger wolfpack. He jotted the details quickly and delivered them to the captain. "Multiple subs, bearing 110, he reported, voice tight. Captain Warren made a rapid decision. "Escort vessels, tighten screen. Keep formation tight. Anti-submarine teams, ready all measures." Engines accelerated, depth charges readied. The tension on deck was palpable, the knowledge that a single hit could destroy a ship hanging over every sailor like a shadow. The convoy moved with painstaking precision, a long, fragile chain threading through the dark ocean. Jacob returned to the radio room, checking frequencies, taking notes, and mentally preparing for the worst. Nightfall approached, and with it, the Atlantic's deadliest hour. Somewhere beneath the waves, hidden, the enemy waited, confident and patient. Jacob leaned back, heart pounding. He could almost hear the pulse of the hidden submarines, calculating, observing, choosing the first target. He whispered softly to himself, We will make it. We must. And in that silent hope, he realized how fragile courage could be in a world ruled by water and steel. June 2nd, 1944. The night was black and endless, broken only by the occasional flash of distant lightning illuminating the restless sea. The convoy pressed forward, engines rumbling in perfect sync, a long line of steel threading through the ocean's vast emptiness. Jacob Harlow hunched over the radio, scanning for the faintest Morse signal that might hint at lurking danger. Every creak of the hull, every groan of the deck underfoot, made his stomach tighten. The Atlantic had no mercy for those unprepared. Sailors wrapped in oilskins moved silently, obeying every command with robotic precision. Their eyes betrayed exhaustion, but their hands never faltered, gripping rails, weapons, and ropes as the convoy maintained its deadly rhythm. A sharp crackle burst through Jacob's headset. He froze, adjusting the headphones. It was a faint but unmistakable transmission. A wolfpack was coordinating, probably shadowing the eastern flank. He scribbled rapidly, sending the alert to Lieutenant Ellery. The officer's expression darkened. They're moving closer. Estimated approach, 2 nautical miles. The captain's voice rang through the intercom. All hands, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Depth charges ready. Maintain formation. No one falters. The Baxter shifted slightly, engines roaring, sending waves crashing against the smaller merchant ships. The convoy responded instantly, zigzagging to confuse any potential torpedo strike. Jacob returned to his post, heart hammering. Each silence between signals felt like a countdown to disaster. He scanned the static, listening for the coded pulses, for any subtle clue that the U-boats were closing. Every passing hour stretched his nerves tighter, making the deck beneath him feel like a thin barrier between life and death. In the distance, one of the merchant ships shuddered violently. An explosion rocked the hull. Crew members screamed and water sprayed across the deck. Jacob's stomach dropped. Another U-boat attack. The escort surged forward, firing depth charges into the dark waters. The ocean erupted violently, sending columns of spray and foam into the night air. The Baxter's sonar officer pointed at the screen, showing a flickering blip. Bearing 120, 200 meters. Jacob relayed the information to the bridge. Orders came instantly. Every depth charge was ready, every crew member at alert. The convoy moved like a single organism. Every action synchronized with precision, honed by training and necessity. Minutes passed in a tense rhythm. Another merchant ship to starboard signaled distress. A torpedo had found its mark, and sailors scrambled to rescue those thrown into the frigid sea. Jacob's hands shook as he keyed the radio, sending coordinates and status updates to the rest of the convoy. The Atlantic swallowed screams, and the night echoed with chaos. By dawn, the convoy had stabilized, but the tension remained palpable. Sailors huddled together, exhausted but vigilant. Jacob wiped the cold sweat from his brow and glanced at the horizon, trying to read the shifting waves for any hint of further attacks. Every shadow on the water could be deadly. Every flicker of movement could mean destruction. The morning light revealed the toll of the night. Damaged merchant ships limping along, sailors nursing injuries, and the constant threat of unseen U-boats beneath the rolling swells. Jacob felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. His mind traced every signal, every pattern, calculating survival odds for each vessel, each man, each life entrusted to their convoy's fragile formation. Lieutenant Ellery came to the radio room, his face pale but determined. Jacob, we may have another approaching group. Estimated speed, 20 knots. Bearing 095. We need to tighten formation immediately. Jacob nodded. Already on it, sir. All hands are ready. Depth charges prepped. We just have to keep them from picking us off one by one. The convoy surged forward with renewed purpose. The Atlantic stretched infinitely, dark and merciless, a predator whose teeth were hidden just below the surface. Each sailor's resolve was tested, each heartbeat counted. Jacob sat at his station, fingers poised over the key, knowing that a single mistake could mean hundreds of lives lost in seconds. The day wore on, waves rising and falling like a heartbeat of the ocean. The convoy held tight, passing debris from previous attacks and witnessing the brutal reality of war at sea. Jacob took a deep breath, whispering quietly to himself, "We have to make it. We will make it." Every word was a prayer, a mantra, a hope that their courage and discipline would outlast the wolfpack's relentless pursuit. June 3rd, 1944. Dawn broke over the horizon, faint streaks of pink and gold reflecting off the restless Atlantic. The convoy had endured 2 nights of near-constant alert, every moment heavy with the knowledge that U-boats lurked beneath the waves. Sailors moved with measured precision, exhaustion evident in their eyes, but discipline unwavering. Jacob Harlow scanned the radio frequencies once more, adjusting his headset against the biting wind. Static filled the air, but beneath it, he thought he could detect faint Morse signals, signals that hinted at a final approach by enemy submarines. His fingers hovered over the key, ready to alert the captain at a moment's notice. The Baxter maintained its position at the convoy's edge, scanning the horizon for threats. Every creak of the deck, every splash of water against steel, felt amplified. Sailors shifted in their positions, peering into the grey waves, listening for the faintest hint of danger. The Atlantic had been both a protector and predator, and they knew the end of the crossing would test them further. Lieutenant Ellery approached the radio station, voice low but urgent. "Jacob, there's another pattern repeating. 2 subs at 150 meters, approaching rapidly. We must coordinate with the escorts and keep formation tight." Jacob's fingers flew over the key, transmitting coordinates and updates. Every moment mattered. Every second could decide life or death. Hours passed. The convoy pressed forward, navigating waves and enemy threats. Merchant ships limped alongside, damaged but afloat, their crews clinging to hope. Sailors exchanged brief nods, silent acknowledgements of shared endurance. Jacob listened to every signal, deciphering movements, predicting danger, and silently praying that each depth charge would find its target. By late afternoon, land appeared faintly on the horizon, England's coastline, offering the promise of safety and relief. Yet the threat of the wolfpack remained. Submarines could strike at any moment, and the tension on deck was nearly unbearable. Sailors moved with vigilance, eyes scanning the water, hands ready for action, each heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the convoy. Jacob leaned against the rail, letting the wind whip against his face. He thought of home, of letters he had sent that might never be read, of family waiting thousands of miles away. And he thought of the men around him, young and old, every life tied together in the fragile line of ships cutting through the Atlantic. The convoy tightened its formation as the sun dipped lower. Depth charges were prepped for a final sweep. Escorts flanked the merchant ships, their guns trained on the water. Every sailor knew the stakes. Every action carried the weight of hundreds of lives. Jacob's hands trembled slightly as he keyed the radio one last time, sending updates and coordinating with the other ships. As night fell, the final encounter came. A submarine surfaced briefly in the distance, its conning tower cutting the waves like a knife. The Baxter's guns roared to life, flares streaked across the sky, and depth charges detonated near the lurking predator. Water exploded in towering columns, and the roar of metal and sea filled the night. Sailors braced themselves, adrenaline mixing with fear and determination. By midnight, the wolfpack had been driven off or destroyed. The convoy remained largely intact, battered but alive. Jacob slumped in exhaustion at his radio station, watching the dark water roll by. The survivors of the convoy would remember this crossing for the rest of their lives. The tension, the fear, the courage, and the sheer determination that had carried them across the Atlantic. June 4th, 1944. The convoy approached the English coast, battered but triumphant. Jacob and the crew of the Baxter allowed themselves brief smiles of relief. The Atlantic had tested them, the wolfpack had stalked them, but together they had survived. Each man aboard understood the cost of survival and the fragile miracle of reaching safety. Jacob looked at the coastline ahead, thinking of letters, families, and the countless stories of those who had been lost. And yet, he believed, against fear, against darkness, that their courage, discipline, and unity had brought them through. They had made it across, but the Atlantic would never forget their passage, and neither would they.